Three teenagers, not even old enough to vote yet, went to court this morning to face murder charges as adults.
They ruled the streets, commanded fear, and built reputations as some of the most ruthless women in crime. But even the toughest gangster has to face the cold steel of justice. Today, we're diving into the shocking moments when some of the most dangerous female gang leaders and killers heard the words they could never escape: life in prison.
All to be paid out of prison funds. You have 30 days within which to file a notice of appeal.
From Rosalie Shorty Garcia, who ran with a violent New York drug crew, to Susan Atkins, the Manson family member who shocked the nation with her crimes, to Jennifer Mee, once known as the Hiccup Girl, who spiraled from viral fame into a life sentence for murder. These are the raw reactions, the courtroom drama, and the chilling downfall of women who thought they were untouchable. Buckle up. These are the most dangerous female gang leaders reacting to life sentences. First up is Franecha Torres. On October 17, 2018, Franecha Torres, who was just 17 years old, stood with her head lowered as the judge began to speak. Alongside two other teenagers, she was about to hear the words that would change her life forever. The charge was murder. The sentence, life behind bars. The shock on her face tells it all.
You have 3 warrants for armed robbery and 1 warrant for felony murder.
An apparently shocked Franecha Torres threw glares at her 2 co-defendants.
How did a young woman, once seen as just another high schooler, go down the path of gang violence? Torres was no stranger to the streets of Gwinnett County, Georgia. Investigators described her as tied to a small but dangerous group of teenagers who had turned robbery into a routine. Their crimes were quick, calculated, and often violent. But one night it went too far. A young man, 21-year-old William Tunchez, was found dead along a walking trail in Suwannee. Children discovered his body. The community was shaken and police moved fast. Within days, they connected Torres and her crew to the killing. When the case reached the courts, the details were grim. Prosecutors painted the picture of a teenager who stepped into the role of leadership. Torres, though young, was no follower. She was accused of planning the robbery, luring the victim, and helping set the stage for violence. It was not only the act itself, but the sense of control she exerted over her group that convinced the jury she was more than just a participant. She was central. The trial exposed the dark contrast between her age and her choices. Family members of the victim sat in court, waiting for justice. They listened as detectives laid out evidence, from stolen belongings to cell phone records. Each fact stacked against her, making it harder for the defense to argue innocence. And so the momentum built. Finally came sentencing day. The judge's words were measured but heavy. Life in prison. No possibility of returning to the freedom she once knew. Torres looked intently at him at first, her expression steady, as though she believed some miracle might arrive at the last second. But when the gavel came down, her composure cracked. For the victim's family, it was a moment of relief mixed with sorrow. They had lost a son, a brother, a friend. No sentence could bring him back. Yet the punishment brought a sense of finality. The gang's violence would claim no more lives. Up next is Susan Atkins. On August 9, 1969, inside a quiet home on Cielo Drive, actress Sharon Tate, 8 months pregnant, was murdered along with 4 others in a frenzy of violence so shocking that newspapers called it the end of the 1960s dream. And at the center of this storm was a woman named Susan Atkins, a name the world would soon know as one of the most dangerous female killers in modern history. She wasn't just any gang member, she was a soldier in the cult-like army of Charles Manson, a man who convinced his followers that murder was part of a twisted prophecy. When Susan Atkins went on trial in 1970, America wasn't just watching another criminal case, it was watching a spectacle. The courtroom became a theater, the defendants the unwilling stars, and the press couldn't look away. Susan Atkins, sitting alongside Charles Manson and other family members, played her part to perfection. She was young, striking in appearance, and utterly unrepentant. The media called her Sadie Mae Glutz, her bizarre family nickname, and plastered her face across magazines and newspapers. For months, she was treated almost like a morbid celebrity, a dangerous woman who smirked at the cameras as though she were walking a red carpet, not sitting on trial for one of the most shocking massacres in American history. And that was the sickest irony of all. While families mourned their loved ones, Susan Atkins seemed to enjoy the attention.
I didn't think anything about it.
What about
Do you want a,
Susan?
I think she's awful pretty.
Back it up.
do you want a press conference, Tony?
I don't feel
But here's the question. How did a girl from a broken home become one of the most infamous killers of her generation? Let's rewind. Susan Denise Atkins was born in 1948. Her childhood was marked by instability. Her mother died of cancer when Susan was only a teenager, leaving her adrift. Her father struggled to raise the family, and Susan dropped out of high school. She was young, insecure, and desperate for belonging. That hunger for acceptance would make her the perfect target. By 1967, she drifted into the world of San Francisco counterculture, hippie communes, drugs, free love, all the things young people believed would change the world. But Susan wasn't just searching for peace, she was searching for family. And that's when she met Charles Manson, a man with a guitar, a hypnotic stare, and a dangerous philosophy. He promised freedom, love, and survival in a world he claimed was on the edge of collapse. To Susan, who felt lost and unloved, Manson seemed like the father she never had, and the savior she thought she needed. But what she didn't realize was this. She wasn't joining a family, she was joining a death squad. Manson gathered young people around him and fed them LSD, sex, and sermons about an apocalyptic race war he called Helter Skelter. In his fantasy, black Americans would rise up, kill the white elite, and when the dust settled, Manson and his family would emerge as rulers of a new world. It sounds insane, and it was. But under the haze of drugs and control, his followers believed it. They believed him so completely that when he whispered, "Kill for me," they obeyed. Susan Atkins became one of his most devoted soldiers. He gave her a new name, Sadie Mae Glutz. And then came the night that would make her a household name. August 8, 1969. Manson told Atkins and 3 others, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian, to go to the house at 10,050 Cielo Drive. His words were chilling. Do it as gruesomely as you can. That night, Susan Atkins walked into a nightmare of her own making. Sharon Tate, a Hollywood actress married to director Roman Polanski, was 8 months pregnant. Inside the house were her friends, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and Stephen Parent. The killers were armed with knives and a gun. And what happened next was a storm of violence. Victims begged for their lives, but the attackers showed no mercy. In the chaos, Susan Atkins held Sharon Tate down. Tate pleaded for her unborn baby, but Atkins was unmoved. In 1971, the jury reached its verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Susan Atkins, Charles Manson, and the other family members were sentenced to death. For a brief moment, the families of the victims felt justice had been served. Atkins was going to pay the ultimate price. But then came another twist. In 1972, California's Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty. Overnight, Atkins's sentence was reduced to life in prison. She had escaped execution, and for many Americans, it felt like a betrayal. Susan Atkins was going to live, even though Sharon Tate and her unborn child never got the chance. In September 2009, Susan Atkins died at the age of 61. She had spent nearly 4 decades in prison. Her death closed her personal story, but not the questions it left behind. If you think that was chilling, then you need to see the case of Sierra Harp. On June 26, 2019, in Clayton County, Georgia, all eyes were on the defendant, Sierra Harp. She was already convicted of murder, guilty of shooting the father of her child, Raheem Grant, multiple times, in front of their young daughter. But no one in that courtroom was prepared for what came next. When the judge allowed Harp's mother to take the stand, the mood shifted instantly. Instead of defending her daughter, she did something no one expected. She attacked her. Her voice cracked with anger as she told the court that chaos seemed to follow Sierra wherever she went. She said her daughter lied, manipulated, and destroyed everything around her.
Envious nature took control, and you murdered Raheem for moving on without you.
The courtroom froze. Even seasoned reporters admitted they had never seen anything like it. A mother standing against her own daughter. And just when people thought it couldn't get any more shocking, she asked the judge for something extreme. She begged the court to sterilize Sierra Harp so she could never bring another child into the world. Sierra's response? Not tears, not regret. She sneered, she mouthed a profanity. She even called her own mother a female dog right there in open court.
Mother asked for the stiffest punishment possible, life without parole. Harp sneered at her mother and mouthed a profanity and called her mother a female dog. Now,
it was chaos layered on top of tragedy. An emotional spectacle that exposed just how broken this family had become. Let's go back into what led to this. In December 2018, Raheem Grant, a rising local rapper and father, was at home with his little daughter. Sierra Harp, the child's mother, was there too. At some point, the tension between them exploded into violence. What makes this case even more disturbing is that Harp herself recorded the shooting on her phone. Over several agonizing minutes, she shot Raheem again and again, while their daughter watched. Raheem begged for his life. In those final moments, he asked only to stay alive long enough to see his little girl grow up. Instead, his daughter became a witness to her mother killing her father. The evidence was impossible to deny. When the trial ended, the jury found Sierra Harp guilty of murder and aggravated assault. She was facing life in prison. But her sentencing hearing was where the true drama unfolded, because that was when her own mother turned against her, and the family's private wounds were ripped wide open for the world to see. For many watching, the moment carried a haunting message. Sometimes the most powerful condemnation does not come from a judge or a jury, but from blood, from family, from the people who know you best. In the end, Kiera Harp was sentenced to life in prison plus 63 years. And that leads us to the case of April Stone.
All to be paid out of prison funds. You have 30 days within which to file a notice of appeal.
October 12, 2010. The air inside the courtroom was heavy. Reporters crowded the back rows, victims' families filled the benches, and everyone waited for the moment they knew was coming. At the front, April Stone stood in silence. She was dressed in a plain prison jumpsuit, her dark hair tied back neatly, but her eyes told a different story. Wide, restless, as if she still hoped for a miracle. When the judge spoke the words, the entire room shifted. Life imprisonment, without parole. The gavel struck, and just like that, the woman who once commanded an army on the streets was stripped of her empire. Some in the audience gasped, others sighed with relief. But April broke down in tears, not the fearless queenpin the media had painted, but a woman realizing she would never walk free again. But how did it come to this? How did April Stone, once described as the Ice Queen of the Blocks, rise to the top of a violent empire, only to end up chained by her own ambition? Let's go back to where it began. April wasn't born a criminal. She was born into poverty, into a city that had forgotten entire neighborhoods, abandoned buildings, failing schools, and streets where sirens replaced lullabies. That was her world. And like so many, she learned early that survival meant choosing sides. In April 2010, it was still dark outside when 72-year-old Lincoln Burks woke up in his small East Side Buffalo apartment. He was a quiet man, living alone, and he had no idea that within hours his life would be cut short in a crime that would shake the neighborhood. That morning, police believe, April Stone made her move. She was 33 years old, unemployed, and known in her community for drifting through life without much direction. But what she did next went far beyond desperation. It was cold, violent, and final. Stone grabbed Burks by the throat and strangled him. Investigators later said the attack happened at around 6:30 a.m. Once Burks was dead, Stone allegedly stole his car and his credit card, fleeing the scene and leaving behind a body that wouldn't be discovered until hours later. But this wasn't just another homicide case in Buffalo. This was different. The brutality of the act, the vulnerability of the victim, and the strange details that followed turned April Stone into one of the most talked about women in the city's criminal history. It was just after midnight when a relative walked into Burke's apartment on Cornwall Avenue. What they found was horrifying. The elderly man lifeless, no signs of forced entry, no chance of revival. Police quickly ruled the death a homicide. The neighborhood was stunned. Burks wasn't a man involved in trouble. He lived quietly, kept to himself, and had no known enemies. So why would someone target him? And here's the part that caught detectives' attention. There were no signs of a break-in. Whoever entered that home either had his trust or had found a way to get inside without forcing the door. That detail would later become critical in unraveling what really happened. For weeks, detectives kept silent. They refused to say if the victim knew his killer. They gave no details about how the suspect entered the home. It was a wall of secrecy that frustrated reporters and kept neighbors on edge. But behind closed doors, the homicide squad was working non-stop. Detective Patrick Judge, along with Detective Mario Prats and Sergeant Jonathan Walton, pieced together the case bit by bit. The stolen car was a big lead. So was the stolen credit card. Each left a trail that led to her. And then, 4 weeks later, it happened. Police arrested April Stone inside Buffalo Police Headquarters on Franklin Street. The woman no one expected was suddenly charged with second-degree murder and second-degree robbery. At 33 years old, she wasn't the kind of hardened career criminal people usually picture in homicide cases. Instead, she was a woman adrift. No job, no stability, drifting in and out of low-level trouble. And here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because when April Stone sat in that courtroom, facing the weight of the evidence against her, she didn't look like the fearless predator described by police. She looked shaken, frightened, and out of control. The trial became headline news in Buffalo. Cameras caught every moment April was led into court, shackled at the wrists. For the media, she became a character straight out of a crime thriller. The Buffalo Strangler, the woman accused of betraying an old man's trust for a car and a credit card. And then came the moment of truth. When the jury found her guilty, April Stone broke down in tears. Gone was the cold mask she wore at trial. In its place was panic, the raw realization that she was never going home again. Next is Jennifer Mee, September 20th, 2013. The verdict came down inside a Clearwater, Florida courtroom. Guilty of first-degree murder.
You can see that Mee broke down right as that verdict was read. She was obviously hoping that the jury would convict her on a lesser charge, perhaps accessory to murder or manslaughter.
In that instant, Jennifer Mee, who once went viral as America's hiccup girl, broke. Tears streamed down her face as the reality hit. She had hoped, perhaps even believed, that the jury might spare her, that her role in the crime would not be punished so severely. But the words from the judge sealed her fate: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her mother couldn't bear it. She walked out before the sentence was read, only to later hear the crushing truth: her daughter would spend the rest of her life behind bars.
But she did not want to talk. Again, Mee's mother did not make it back into the courtroom in time to hear the verdict. Instead, she found out from family members that her daughter will spend the rest of her life behind bars.
What stunned the world was not just the crime itself, but the transformation. This wasn't the shy teenager who once hiccuped 50 times a minute on morning talk shows. This was a young woman branded as a manipulator, a gang accomplice, and now a convicted murderer. And as she wept in the courtroom, cameras rolled, capturing the final act of a story that had begun years earlier with a strange medical condition and 15 minutes of fame. But let's go back in time to understand how this American darling ended up in this situation. September 12, 2010. A cool night in St. Petersburg, Florida. A young man named Shannon Griffin went out, expecting to meet a girl. Instead, he walked straight into a deadly trap. By the time the night was over, he was shot and killed. The girl at the center of it all, none other than Jennifer Mee. Yes, you heard that right. The same teenage girl who became a viral sensation for her uncontrollable hiccups just 3 years earlier was now being called a cold-blooded orchestrator of murder. From television fame to life in prison, her fall was as bizarre as it was brutal. Jennifer Ann Mee was born in 1991. In 2007, at just 15 years old, she developed a case of extreme hiccups, which was at a rate of more than 50 times a minute. No doctor could explain it, and soon television cameras swarmed her Florida home. Talk shows invited her on. News anchors laughed and speculated. The world called her the Hiccup Girl. But when the hiccups stopped, so did the attention. The media circus packed up, leaving Jennifer behind with nothing but a strange form of fame and no real way to build on it. Behind that short-lived spotlight was a young girl from a broken background, struggling with identity, drifting into the kind of circles that make headlines for all the wrong reasons. This is where the story begins to twist. Fame had opened a door, but when it slammed shut, Jennifer was left looking for belonging elsewhere. And the place she found it was not in Hollywood, but in the streets. Fast forward to September 2010. By then, Jennifer was 19 years old. According to prosecutors, she lured 22-year-old Shannon Griffin out under the pretense of meeting for a date. But Shannon wasn't meeting a potential girlfriend that night. He was walking into a setup. Waiting for him were two of Jennifer's associates, Lamont Newton and LaRon Rayford. Prosecutors said the plan was simple: rob Shannon. But robbery turned to bloodshed. Griffin was shot multiple times and left to die. Now here's the kicker. Jennifer didn't pull the trigger. She didn't even fire a shot. Yet the law didn't care. Why? Because of the felony murder rule, a legal principle that says if you help plan or take part in a crime that results in death, you're just as guilty as the person who actually pulled the gun. That law would change Jennifer's life forever. After the arrest, Jennifer was placed in jail, and here's where things get dramatic. On a recorded phone call to her mother, Jennifer said something chilling: "I didn't kill nobody, but I set everything up." That single line would hang over her trial like a shadow. The prosecution played it to the jury. They painted her not as a bystander, not as a clueless teen, but as the mastermind, the bait in a deadly trap. That call became the prosecution's smoking gun. It was damning, and Jennifer knew it. In 2013, Jennifer Mee walked into court to face the charge of first-degree murder. The same media that once filmed her hiccuping now returned with cameras ready, eager to capture the hiccup girl transformed into a dangerous criminal. And finally, we have the case of Shania McCoy and Erica Osborne. The Frank Murphy Hall of Justice in Detroit was heavy with silence on the morning of February 7, 2018. Family members of a murdered teenager filled the courtroom, waiting to see two young women face justice. On one side sat the defendants, Shania McCoy and Erica Osborne. On the other side, the grieving family of 17-year-old Reginald Robinson, a high school student with dreams and talent who would never walk home again. Before the sentence was read, the judge gave the family a chance to speak. That's when the raw pain of the moment filled the room. Robinson's mother, voice breaking with anger and grief, looked directly at the women who killed her son. She told McCoy that every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself reliving the pain. Then she turned to Osborne, the shooter, and lambasted her too. The courtroom felt the weight of those words. There was no holding back, no politeness, just a mother's fury for the life stolen from her child. Both McCoy and Osborne tried to speak before the judge delivered their sentences. They said they were sorry, but their words were hollow in the face of such loss, and they did not even seem to mean what they were saying.
I wanted to make sure that the family knows that I am sorry.
I apologize for my actions, whether you accept it or not, I apologize for my actions.
Then came the judge's ruling. McCoy, who drove the SUV that night, was sentenced to 16 to 40 years in prison. Osborne, who pulled the trigger, received 27 to 50 years. Now let me give you more insight into the case. On February 24, 2017, Robinson and a friend left a store on Detroit's west side. What happened inside seemed harmless. Robinson laughed when someone commented on the women's bodies, but outside that laugh turned deadly. Surveillance video later showed McCoy's blue Ford Explorer circling the lot. She made a U-turn, positioning the vehicle so her passenger had a clear shot. Then, without hesitation, Osborne fired, hitting Robinson. Police quickly pieced the case together, relying on video evidence and witness accounts. Prosecutors charged both women with first-degree murder. Facing the mountain of evidence, McCoy and Osborne took plea deals, admitting guilt rather than dragging the case.
They were yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me.
They wore the badge to uphold the law, but behind the uniform, some were hiding dark secrets that would shock the nation.
What do you mean by blow job?
I put his dick in my mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did he ejaculate?
No.
These are the stories of female officers who crossed the line, got caught, and ended up facing life sentences for crimes no one ever expected from those sworn to protect. Number 10. Shalene Diane O'Banion.
So it's illegal to have sexual contact with an inmate as an employee. So I said the ball kind of be in their court, but I'll let you know as soon as I hear something.
This case happened in Louisville, Kentucky, with a police officer who was supposed to serve and protect, but instead crossed a line so dark, it stunned the entire department. Her name was Shalene Diane O'Banion, a once respected officer whose secret double life would soon destroy everything she had built. It started quietly. O'Banion worked in the corrections unit, handling inmates, trusted with authority and access that most people never questioned. But behind that badge, she was building dangerous connections that would lead investigators into a web of corruption, smuggling, and betrayal inside the very system meant to uphold the law. When the first red flags appeared, they seemed minor. Reports of contraband slipping into the facility, odd movements during her shifts, and whispers among inmates about a friendly officer. Still, no one imagined that O'Banion was at the center of it. The shock came when a full internal probe revealed what she was really doing. She had been smuggling drugs, cell phones, and other illegal items into the jail, using her position to bypass searches and hide evidence. But the story didn't stop there. Investigators later discovered that O'Banion wasn't working alone. She had been communicating with certain inmates, building personal relationships, and even accepting money to bring in banned items. Text messages and recorded calls exposed how deep the manipulation went. She had used her authority to gain trust, only to sell it to the highest bidder. Once the evidence surfaced, her entire career collapsed overnight. Federal agents moved in. She was arrested, charged with conspiracy to distribute drugs and misconduct in office, and eventually sentenced to a long prison term. The courtroom was silent as the former officer stood before the judge, the same system she once represented, now branding her as a criminal. The fallout was devastating. The department launched an internal review. Several officers were questioned, and policies were rewritten to prevent another betrayal like hers. Number 9. Antoinette Frank.
For death row inmate Antoinette Frank, the former New Orleans police officer is the only woman on death row.
Antoinette Frank joined the New Orleans Police Department in 1993. On paper, she was everything the department wanted: disciplined, polite, and eager to serve. But within 2 years, she crossed the thin blue line completely. She started associating with a man named Rogers Lacaze, a 19-year-old drug dealer and known criminal. Instead of arresting him, she formed a partnership that would eventually end in bloodshed. Frank used her uniform and police access to cover for Lacaze. Together, they carried out robberies and targeted businesses that trusted her as an officer. One of those places was Kim An, a family-owned Vietnamese restaurant where she worked part-time. The owners and employees believed she was a friend, someone who protected them. They had no idea she was planning their deaths. On the night of March 4th, 1995, Frank and Lacaze entered Kim An after hours. Using her badge, she gained entry without question. What happened next was ruthless. 3 people were shot dead, including 2 of Frank's fellow off-duty officers working security, and one of the owner's daughters. The killers fled, leaving behind a crime scene that horrified even veteran detectives. When investigators pieced the evidence together, the trail led directly to Officer Frank. Witnesses confirmed she had been at the restaurant moments before the attack. Ballistics matched her service weapon. And the most shocking detail, she later returned to the crime scene, pretending to help with the investigation. The court found her guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She showed little emotion as the verdict was read. In 1995, Antoinette Frank was sentenced to death, one of the rare female officers in US history to face that penalty. Number 8. Officer Ashley MacArthur.
I am going to adjudicate you guilty. I'm going to sentence you to life with a mandatory minimum 25 years state prison for the...
She was supposed to be a friend, someone trusted to help. Instead, she became a killer. This is the case of Ashley MacArthur, a former crime scene technician who murdered her close friend Taylor Wright, a private investigator and former police officer, all over money and lies. In September 2017, Taylor Wright confided in Ashley while going through a difficult divorce. She handed Ashley a cashier's check for $34,000, money meant to be kept safe until the court process was over. Ashley agreed to help, but instead of protecting the money, she quietly deposited it into her own account and began spending it. That decision would set off a deadly chain of events.
Ashley. And what they found was that there was a $34,000 cashier's check made out to Taylor Wright that was deposited in August of 2017.
On September 8, 2017, Taylor went to meet Ashley to talk about getting her money back. It was the last time she was seen alive. Ashley told Taylor's girlfriend and police that Taylor had stormed off to get a beer, leaving her phone behind. At first, investigators had no reason to doubt her. Ashley was calm, cooperative, and even helped with the search. But soon, her story began to fall apart. Phone records revealed Ashley's movements didn't match her statements. Instead of being at home, her phone pinged near a rural property in Cantonment, Florida, land belonging to her family. Days later, she texted Taylor's phone pretending to be her, trying to make it look like Taylor had run away. Investigators grew suspicious.
Brides would put things over here, the gazebo was used, and on the back side of the property down here, it gets more of a natural look. Okay. Not this area, no.
2 weeks later, the truth surfaced. During a search of Ashley's family property, police found Taylor Wright's remains buried under concrete and potting soil, shot in the back of the head. The fake texts, the missing money, the timeline, it all connected back to Ashley. She was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder. During her trial in 2019, prosecutors laid out the evidence: the financial theft, the deception, and the calculated murder to cover it up. The jury took only a few hours to find her guilty. The judge sentenced Ashley MacArthur to life in prison. Number 7. Officer Kim Potter.
We're yelling, "Taser, taser, taser," and nothing happened. And then he told me I should.
This is one of the most shocking police cases in recent US history. The story of Officer Kim Potter, the veteran cop whose split-second mistake cost a young man his life and destroyed her own career. What started as a routine traffic stop in a quiet Minnesota suburb turned into a national outrage, a courtroom battle, and a long prison sentence that stunned both police officers and the public.
Recalling the moments she shot Wright in the chest with her gun that she says she mistook for her taser. In April, Wright was initially pulled over for an expired tag and an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror.
It happened on April 11th, 2021. Officer Kim Potter, a 26-year police veteran with the Brooklyn Center Police Department, pulled over 20-year-old Daunte Wright. The reason seemed simple: expired registration tags and an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. But when the officers ran his name, they found he had an outstanding warrant. As they tried to arrest him, Wright resisted and got back into his car. In those few seconds, everything went wrong. Body camera footage showed Potter yelling, "Taser, taser, taser!" But what she had in her hand was her gun. She fired once, striking Wright in the chest. The car rolled forward and crashed. Within moments, Daunte Wright was dead. Potter immediately realized her mistake, screaming, "I grabbed the wrong gun!" The entire incident was captured on camera, sparking massive protests across Minnesota and nationwide. Investigators moved fast. Potter was charged with first and second-degree manslaughter. The prosecution argued that her training and years of experience made the mistake inexcusable. The defense claimed it was an accident, a tragic human error in a high-stress moment. But for the jury, the evidence was clear. A young man was dead, and a police officer had failed in her duty to act responsibly.
I'm so sorry. I didn't want to hurt anybody.
In December 2021, Kim Potter was found guilty. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, later extended after appeals and review. Her emotional apology in court couldn't undo what had happened. The sentence sent a strong message. Law enforcement officers are not above accountability, even in split-second decisions. Number 6. Officer Alfreda Fluker.
To the Jefferson County Jail, where she will be booked on multiple charges, with the most serious being murder.
She was a respected police officer in Birmingham, Alabama, trusted to protect her community. But in one night of rage and betrayal, Officer Alfreda Fluker went from enforcing the law to breaking it in the most shocking way possible. What happened next would expose a secret affair, a violent confrontation, and the end of a once promising career. It all began in the early hours of April 10, 2020. Alfreda Fluker, a veteran officer with the Birmingham Police Department, had been in a secret relationship with another officer, Mario White. But their romance had started to fall apart, and jealousy began to take over. That night, Fluker tracked Mario's car to the Titusville neighborhood, a quiet area where she believed he was meeting another woman. As she pulled up, her worst fears were confirmed. Inside the car was Mario White, and next to him was another off-duty officer, 43-year-old Kanisha Peterson. What happened next turned deadly. Witnesses later told investigators they heard a series of gunshots tear through the night. When police arrived, Peterson was found in the passenger seat, shot multiple times. She died at the scene. Fluker didn't run.
Birmingham Police Detective. It has been determined that the suspect and shooter was also a Birmingham police detective.
In fact, she stayed near the area until investigators connected her to the shooting. Within hours, the officer once known for her calm professionalism was in handcuffs, accused of murder. Police Chief Patrick Smith called it one of the hardest arrests his department had ever made. The badge she once wore as a symbol of justice became the evidence of her downfall. During the trial, prosecutors laid out the details, the text messages, the jealousy, the gunfire. They said this was a calculated act driven by rage. The jury agreed. Alfreda Fluker was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Judge Michael Idiart could have sent Gonzalez to jail for up to 16 months, but noted she had no prior criminal history and admitted her crimes early.
Number 5. Tina Gonzalez. It started in late 2019 when whispers spread through the Fresno County Jail that one of their own might be helping inmates break the rules in ways no one could have imagined. Officers began noticing strange behavior from certain inmates, extra privileges, late-night activities, and coded messages being passed around. When internal investigators checked surveillance footage and communication logs, what they uncovered was shocking. They found that Gonzalez had been secretly communicating with an inmate she was assigned to supervise. The relationship quickly crossed every professional and ethical line. Investigators said she cut a hole in her uniform pants to engage in sexual activity with the inmate, right inside the jail. She was also accused of supplying him with a cell phone, razor blades, and other contraband items that could put other officers at risk. When detectives confronted her, Gonzalez at first tried to deny everything. But the evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, call records, and testimony from other inmates exposed the truth. She had used her position of authority not just to break the law, but to endanger her colleagues and compromise the entire security of the facility. The courtroom was silent when prosecutors revealed the details. Even the judge called it the most egregious breach of trust he had ever seen in his career. Gonzalez showed little emotion as the charges were read: sexual activity with an inmate, smuggling contraband, and violating her oath of duty. When the sentence was finally handed down, the courtroom gasped. Tina Gonzalez was given 7 months in jail and 2 years of probation. The judge said she destroyed her integrity and brought shame to an entire department. The once celebrated officer who swore to uphold the law became an inmate herself, locked behind the same walls she once guarded. Number 4. Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson. In the city of Roswell, Georgia, 2 police officers, Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson, were supposed to protect the public. But what they did during a traffic stop in 2018 shocked the entire nation and destroyed their careers. It started with a simple speeding stop on a rainy April afternoon. A woman named Sarah Webb was pulled over for driving too fast in her silver Chevrolet. She expected a warning or maybe a ticket. What she didn't know was that her fate was about to be decided by a game, a coin flip.
Okay. This is tail, right? Yeah. So really, 23. Michael Jordan. Hi. So I got too fast for. Let me write this down. Too fast for conditions. Is it reckless? Yeah, you can do reckless.
Body camera footage later revealed what really happened that day. As Webb sat nervously in her car, Brown and Wilson stood outside, debating whether to arrest her. Instead of following police protocol, Officer Wilson took out a phone app that simulated flipping a coin. "Heads, you go to jail. Tails, you go free," one of them said, laughing. The coin landed on tails, but despite that, they arrested her anyway.
Sorry, my window doesn't hold.
Off the Brown Roswell Police Department. You know how fast you were just going, ma'am?
I'm so sorry, I'm late.
That single moment, captured on body cam, went viral across the world. The public was stunned. 2 sworn officers had turned someone's life into a game, mocking the very justice system they served. Roswell Police Department quickly launched an internal investigation. The footage showed that the officers didn't just make a mistake, they made a mockery of the law.
These people really put my freedom in the hands of a coin flip.
Within days, both Brown and Wilson were placed on administrative leave. But as the backlash grew, the department had no choice but to fire them. Investigators found that this wasn't about one bad decision, it was about total disregard for duty. The district attorney's office dismissed the case against Webb, saying her arrest had no legal standing because of the officer's misconduct. When the court finally reviewed the case, it was clear. The so-called coin flip cops had violated ethics, trust, and public confidence. Both women faced criminal charges and were later given long sentences for their actions, ending their law enforcement careers for good. Number 3. Razvinder Agalyu. This is a case of a trusted police officer who thought she could outsmart the very system she swore to protect. Her name was Razvinder Agalyu, a police constable from Bedfordshire, England. Once respected, now remembered for one of the most shocking betrayals of duty in British policing history. It all started in 2019, when Agalyu secretly began leaking sensitive police information to her criminal boyfriend, a man linked to drug trafficking and organised crime. Using her position, she accessed confidential police databases, searching names, vehicle registrations, and intelligence reports, all without authorization. Every search she made was another line crossed, another step deeper into corruption. At first, her actions went unnoticed. She appeared professional, calm, and committed, exactly what her colleagues expected. But the deception couldn't last forever. Internal investigators began to notice strange activity on police systems. Files were being accessed without reason. Patterns started to form, and every trail led back to one name, Razvinder Agalyu. Detectives launched a covert internal probe. They tracked her database searches, cross-checked her communication records, and quietly built their case. The evidence was undeniable. Agalyu had been feeding inside information to criminals for personal and emotional gain. It was not a single mistake. It was a repeated act of betrayal. In 2021, the investigation came to light. Agalyu was arrested, and what shocked the public most was how easily she had manipulated her access and abused the badge. During questioning, she tried to claim it was a mistake, but the data told another story. Hundreds of unauthorized searches, all linked to known offenders. In court, prosecutors detailed her calculated deception. She had used her uniform as a shield, pretending to enforce the law while secretly helping those who broke it. The judge called it a gross breach of public trust. The sentence was firm. She was given 3 years in prison and permanently banned from serving in law enforcement. Number 2. Melissa Goodwin, Austin, Texas.
a girl and a guard at Silverwater until she was caught sharing secret phone calls and a love letter with armed robber.
Inside the secure halls of the Travis County Jail, a stunning story of betrayal unfolded, one that shook the foundation of trust within law enforcement. Melissa Goodwin, a correctional officer sworn to uphold the law, instead became the face of corruption behind bars. She wasn't caught by a stranger or a random tip, but by the very system she was supposed to defend. At work, Goodwin appeared dedicated and disciplined. Her colleagues described her as calm, efficient, and professional. No one suspected that beneath the uniform, she was living a double life. What started with casual conversations with an inmate soon crossed a dangerous line. The inmate, serving time for robbery, knew how to manipulate and charm. Slowly, Goodwin slipped from rule enforcer to rule breaker. Before long, she was smuggling contraband into the jail, snacks, handwritten notes, and even cell phones. Surveillance footage later exposed strange exchanges and coded gestures between her and the inmate. She believed she was careful, that no one would ever notice. But investigators were already watching every move. For months, Internal Affairs built a quiet case against her. They monitored calls, tracked her activities, and pieced together digital evidence. Each discovery led to another until the full extent of her misconduct was undeniable. When Goodwin was finally confronted, she tried to deny her involvement. But the evidence, text messages, phone logs, and security footage left no room for doubt. In 2022, Melissa Goodwin was arrested and charged with official misconduct, abuse of office, and smuggling contraband to an inmate. Prosecutors detailed how she had used her position to break the very rules she was paid to enforce. Faced with overwhelming proof, Goodwin pleaded guilty. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered a clear message. No badge, no uniform, and no authority can protect someone from accountability. Goodwin was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Number 1. Sergeant Kawana Jenkins.
A couple of other examples. Authorities say a former jail staffer put herself in a compromising position with a male inmate in a private jail office.
January 2023. Inside the Fulton County Jail in Georgia, a story was quietly unfolding that would soon explode into one of the most humiliating scandals in the state's law enforcement history. Sergeant Kawana Jenkins, a veteran corrections officer with years of experience, was trusted to maintain order and discipline among inmates. Her job was to enforce the rules and keep the facility safe. But behind those locked doors, she was breaking every rule she swore to uphold. The first sign of trouble came in early 2023, when a short, shaky video began circulating among inmates. It wasn't an ordinary clip. It showed a woman in uniform, clearly a Fulton County officer, engaging in explicit acts with an inmate. The video spread quickly, eventually leaking online. At first, no one believed it could be true, but investigators soon confirmed what shocked everyone. The woman in the video was Sergeant Kawana Jenkins.
You had this image, restaurant meals brought to inmates by an officer. Vice Chair Ellis says taxpayers are paying for.
Once the video surfaced, investigators acted immediately. The inmate involved was identified and questioned. Officers searched his cell and discovered the phone used to record the encounters, a contraband device that never should have been inside the facility. But what they found on that phone went far beyond one video. There were multiple recordings showing Jenkins with the same inmate in compromising situations. Some clips allegedly captured her helping him hide the phone, a clear sign this was not a one-time lapse but an ongoing relationship built on secrecy and risk. Days later, Jenkins was arrested. The department she once served with pride released a statement expressing shock and disappointment. Prosecutors moved swiftly, charging her with sexual contact with an inmate, violation of oath by a public officer, cruelty to inmates, and possession of prohibited materials. Every piece of evidence, from digital files to surveillance footage, pointed directly to her guilt. There was no escaping the truth. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. In court, the prosecution laid out a disturbing picture. They showed how Jenkins' actions had endangered the safety of both staff and inmates, and how her choices had eroded the very trust that holds correctional institutions together. Her defense claimed she was coerced, pressured by the inmate, but the evidence told a colder story. These were not accidents or isolated moments. They were repeated acts of misconduct carried out by someone who knew exactly what she was risking. When the verdict came, it was decisive. Jenkins was sentenced to years in prison, her badge stripped, her reputation destroyed. Her story became a cautionary tale whispered across correctional departments in Georgia and beyond, a reminder that even those who guard the walls can fall prey to the temptations within them.
At this point, I don't even know who's going to raise my children, or if I'm ever going to be able to ever hug them again or comfort them.
"15 women, 15 convictions, and 15 different reactions to receiving life sentences. These 15 women committed horrific acts, and juries found them guilty, sentencing them to life in prison. Here's how these criminals reacted when the gavel banged, sealing their fate. Jodi Arias.
It is ordered. The defendant shall be incarcerated in the Department of Corrections for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias met at a work conference in 2006. That same year, Jodi joined his church, was even baptized by him, and moved to Mesa to be closer to someone she believed was her soulmate. But friends and family of Travis didn't have the best opinion of her. They believed she was obsessed with Travis to the point of stalking him and sabotaging any of his other relationships. Even in the days leading to his passing, Travis had told friends that he'd grown scared of Jodi. In 2008, after friends hadn't been able to reach him for days, they entered his apartment and found him lying in a pool of his blood. According to the coroner's report, Travis had sustained 27 stab wounds, had defensive wounds all around him, and had been shot in the forehead at point-blank range. The coroner also determined that the gunshot had been done post-mortem after Travis had already passed. Jodi was an immediate suspect for several reasons. She'd been staying at his residence around the time he'd been found. She'd also recently dyed her hair and had gotten a rental car that was found to have contained a red substance when she returned it, and she changed her story several times when police questioned her. Ultimately, Jodi's defense to first-degree unaliving was that Travis had it coming. He'd been hurting her throughout their 2-year, on-again and off-again relationship, and had hurt her that day as well. The jury, however, saw images from a digital camera found in Travis's home that contained pictures of the couple spending the day together before one final image that showed Travis bloodied after he'd been attacked. The trial began in 2012 and lasted till 2013. Several witnesses were called on behalf of both sides to the stand. Travis's side claimed that he was a compassionate individual who was fearful of Jodi. Meanwhile, the defense argued that Jodi was a victim herself, and even claimed that Travis had certain urges that made him a sociopath. In the end, however, a jury found that Jodi had premeditated the unaliving, stealing a gun from her grandparents' house, renting a car to go to Mesa in secret, and leaving the scene without telling anyone, and recommended a life sentence. As the verdict was read, Travis's family smiled and hugged one another. Crowds outside the courtroom began cheering and chanting. Leticia Stauch.
He had one of the guns. And I was terrified. So terrified.
In January 2020, Leticia Stauch reported to the El Paso County Sheriff's Department that her 11-year-old stepson, Gannon Stauch, was missing. She claimed that he'd left home around 4 that evening to walk to a friend's house. Initially, investigators believed that Gannon might have run away from home, classifying him as a juvenile runaway. Days later, they reclassified the case and began looking into Leticia's history with her stepson. Leticia had a whole list of defenses ready when investigators told her that she was a person of interest in this case. She claimed that Gannon had stayed home from school that day because he was ill, and they spent the whole day together until 4 in the evening. Later, in March, when Gannon's body was found in Florida with stab wounds and a gunshot wound, she changed her story and claimed that she was not guilty by reason of insanity. Leticia wanted everyone to believe that she had dissociative personality disorder and therefore wasn't in control of what happened when she unalived Gannon. Her 5-week trial began in 2023. The prosecution had a whole list of witnesses who testified on behalf of Gannon and how he was the sweetest boy anyone had met. Meanwhile, the defense only called a single witness to testify, a psychiatrist, to allow Leticia's insanity plea to go forward. However, the jury rejected her plea. In the end, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole plus 156 years by Judge Gregory Werner, who called her actions the most horrific I have ever seen, and said that she deserved the maximum sentence that I can impose according to Colorado law. Lori Vallow Daybell.
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors don't know us.
Gotcha.
Like, hi neighbor, sorry.
The media referred to her doomsday mom. That's because Lori Daybell was convinced that she was a deity, sent on Earth to help Chad Daybell, the Messiah, complete his mission. Both Lori, Chad, and her brother Alex had deviated from conventional Mormonism and started a doomsday cult of their own, led by Chad. They believed that the world would end in 2020 and that they had to absolve their family before then. Police first believed that something wasn't right when Laurie's 2 children were reported missing in September 19. They then found out that the couple had only recently gotten married after both their spouses had passed away under mysterious circumstances. In fact, they'd gotten married just 2 weeks after Chad's wife, Tammy, had passed away. Laurie's nephew-in-law, Brandon, later told investigators how there'd been an attempt on his life, and he believed that Laurie, Chad, and Alex were responsible. Police eventually searched through Chad's property and found both of Laurie's children's bodies at the site. They then had enough evidence to charge her with the unaliving of 4 people and the attempted unaliving of another. Laurie stood as her own defense attorney, trying to throw out the case with whatever legal jargon she could. However, the jury ultimately decided that she'd premeditated the unalivings with Chad to hide their affair, claim insurance money, and start a new life. In the end, she received a life sentence for each case she was tried in. Chad, on the other hand, received capital punishment, but Alex had already passed away before his sentencing could begin. Pamela Smart. At 22, Pamela Smart began a relationship with 15-year-old Billy Flynn. Besides the obvious, the other complication in their relationship was Gregory William Smart, Pamela's husband. Pamela had met Billy at Winnacunnet High School, where she worked as a media coordinator. The two began a relationship in 1990, and Pamela allegedly told Billy that she was withholding intimacy from him until he took care of Gregory. Together with a few of his friends, Billy staged a crime scene at the Smart residence, a burglary gone wrong. Pamela told investigators that she returned home to find her place ransacked and her husband deceased. However, the teenagers caved immediately when confronted by the police. One of Pamela's friends, who knew of her affair, agreed to wear a wire to incriminate Pamela. Her court case was one of the most widely watched court cases in US history because it was one of the very first that allowed television cameras in the courtroom. According to the prosecution, Pamela wanted her husband gone to avoid a lengthy divorce and cash in his life insurance. The prosecution also claimed that Billy and the other teens were also victims in this case. The jury agreed with the prosecution and sentenced Pamela to life in prison for conspiracy and witness tampering when she tried to convince the boys to lie about the affair. Since being incarcerated, Pamela's completed 2 master's degrees and has filed countless appeals. In 2023, she asserted that she still keeps up with what Bill's doing because she believes he'll come clean about what the truth was eventually. Michelle Blair. Police were called to Martin Luther Apartments in Detroit, Michigan, in 2015 to carry out an eviction notice. Michelle Blair hadn't paid rent on her apartment for several months now. The single mother claimed she'd fallen behind after hitting hard times and had been avoiding the landlord for as long as she possibly could. However, a judge granted the landlord's request for an eviction, and police arrived at the scene to move her belongings out of the apartments. In the middle of the chaotic move, they found something terrifying: the bodies of 2 kids, a 13-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. The children were identified as Stoney and Stephen, 2 of Michelle's 4 kids who hadn't been seen or heard from in several months. Apparently, Michelle had unalived both children after individually accusing them of hurting their youngest brother. The other 2 children were found with a relative and handed over to Child Protective Services teams. In court, Michelle recounted the details of what she'd done to Stoney and Stephen without remorse. She claimed that she'd unalived her demon children and that she felt no guilt for it. In fact, she pleaded guilty, and a judge had to hold off on that plea till a competency test proved she was mentally fit to stand trial. According to the coroner's report, Michelle had suffocated both children in a fit of rage, and her gimmick of wanting to protect the youngest child wasn't fooling anyone. The surviving children testified how their mother would regularly hurt them just the same. In the end, the judge found her guilty on all counts and sentenced her to serve a life without parole. In court, Michelle went as far as suggesting that she would gladly take the maximum punishment if that's what it came down to, proving that she never loved any of her children. Doris D.D. Moore. In 2006, Abraham Shakespeare's world was turned upside down when he won a $17 million jackpot. However, he would later claim that he was better off broke. After winning the Florida lottery, Abraham accepted a $17 million payout out of the $30 million, and since then had to face multiple people in court who believed that they were entitled to the millions just like him. This began taking a toll on Abraham, who before then was just a casual laborer. Doris Moore managed to wiggle her way into Abraham's life and convinced him to start a company, Abraham Shakespeare LLC, to keep the funds growing. Instead, she took out $1 million from the company and bought herself expensive cars. In April of 2009, friends and family of Abraham's suspected that he'd gone away to live his life in the Caribbean, somewhere after they hadn't heard from him in months. However, police got a tip that he'd actually been unalived by Doris and was buried in her backyard. Sure enough, the body of Abraham Shakespeare was exhumed, and it was determined that he had passed away from a gunshot wound. Doris changed her story several times, blaming Abraham's passing on drug dealers, robbers, and even her 14-year-old son. She eventually stuck by the claim that she'd unalived him in self-defense. However, the prosecution argued that Doris, like everyone else, was after him for his money. They determined that in the days since unaliving him, Doris had been using Abraham's phone to text people and keep up the ruse that he was still alive. A court found that Doris had premeditated the unaliving and planned it very carefully. They also determined that Doris was a regular con artist and Abraham was just another one of her victims. In the end, they gave her life without the possibility of parole. Kimberly Kessler, Tangle's hair salon in Fernandina Beach, was covered in police tape in 2018 when police determined that a hairdresser there had been unalived by a co-worker. Kimberly Kessler worked with Jolene Cummings, and everyone believed that the two of them got along fine. In fact, when Jolene didn't show up to a scheduled visit to pick up her kids from her ex-husband, the last person anyone suspected was Kimberly. Police initially arrested her ex-boyfriend, whom they accused of threatening and stalking Jolene. However, when police reviewed surveillance footage from Tangle's hair salon, they saw Kimberly disposing of trash bags, washing her shearing scissors, and transporting large amounts of cleaning supplies in her truck. Kimberly immediately became a person of interest, and she was arrested while sleeping in her vehicle at the interstate. While Kimberly's never really given a reason for the unaliving, the prosecution believes that she feared Jolene was onto her. Since the 90s, Kimberly's been using different aliases as she moves across states. So far, she's had over 16 aliases, and Kimberly Kessler isn't even her real name. The police claim that Kimberly flew into a rage when Jolene called her fake, and the two were at odds. She figured that she could unalive Jolene and then make a run for it, this time with another fake name. But investigators caught her before she could make an escape. In court, Kimberly had to be restrained several times after she caused several disruptions. She'd also gone on a hunger strike, claiming that she wouldn't eat until she was released. Unfortunately for her, the judge found her guilty on all counts and sentenced her to life in prison. Shayna Hubers. In 2011, 28-year-old Ryan Poston connected with 20-year-old Shayna Hubers on Facebook. The two soon started a relationship, which friends and family described as very volatile. For the next 18 months, they would continually fight, break up, see other people, and then get back together again. Shayna had accused Ryan of being self-centered and vain. So in October 2012, when she called 911 to report that she'd shot her ex, she told arresting officers she'd done it to give Ryan the nose job he'd always wanted. Shayna then claimed that she'd unalived him in self-defense before being left alone in an interrogation room where she began pacing, dancing, and claiming, "I did it. I did it. I can't believe I did it. I'm so good at acting." Obviously, this didn't sit well with the jurors who believed that not only had Shayna premeditated the unaliving, but that she was happy about it too. Ryan had confided in several friends that he wanted to end the relationship with Shayna permanently, but was afraid of breaking the news to her. He'd claimed to have moved on with someone new and knew that Shayna wouldn't take it too well. He was right. Shayna even bragged to a cellmate that she'd unalived Ryan and claimed that she would plead the battered wife defense to get away with it. However, a jury saw through her act and sentenced her to life in prison. Catherine Magbanua, a well-reputed and well-liked law professor, Dan Markell, was shot and unalived at his Florida home in 2014, and no one could figure out why. Dan had written several best-selling law books and was employed as a law professor at Florida State University. It wasn't until 2 years later that police finally had a lead and arrested Sigfredo Garcia, one of 5 people connected to Dan's unaliving. At the time, back in 2014, Dan was embroiled in a custody battle with his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson. Their divorce was settled in 2013, with 50-50 custody of their kids being granted. However, when Wendy told Dan that she'd planned to move to Miami with the kids, he filed a legal claim that forbade her from relocating with the children. This irked both Wendy's mother, Donna, and her brother, Charlie. According to investigators, Charlie and Donna wanted Dan gone, and they contacted Catherine Magbanua, who was in a personal relationship with Charlie and had mothered 2 of Sigfredo's children to carry out the assassination plot. A court found that had it not been for Catherine accepting a large chunk of money for the plot to unalive Dan, he would still be alive today. After a 2016 mistrial, Catherine was tried again in 2022. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree unaliving, 30 years for the conspiracy, and an additional 30 years for the solicitation. Julissa Thaler. Even on the day of her sentencing, when she was handed life in prison for the unaliving of her 6-year-old son, Julissa Thaler addressed the court with profanity. In 2022, she was stopped for having a busted-out taillight and one of her tires being blown out. In the trunk of the vehicle, police found the body of 6-year-old Eli Hart. Less than 2 weeks before, Julissa had just won a lengthy custody battle with Eli's father, Tory Hart. Tory had tried everything to be awarded sole custody, even recalling the times when Eli had to be sent to foster care over concerns of Julissa's parenting. Eli was released back into Julissa's care, despite Tory's warnings. In 2022, she was arrested after Eli's body was found wrapped in a grey blanket in the trunk of her car. According to witnesses, Julissa had recently learned how to use a shotgun and would often carry the weapon in a grey blanket. According to the coroner's report, Eli had sustained several shotgun injuries that contributed to his passing. In court, she claimed that she was innocent despite taking a plea for second-degree unaliving. Per Minnesota law, this gave her a stronger chance of avoiding life imprisonment. Ultimately, a jury believed that she was guilty on all counts and sentenced her to life behind bars. Nicole Nachtman. Nicole Nachtman's lawyers argued that she'd suffered an emotional breakdown in 2015 after years and years of emotional anguish brought on by her mother. In 2015, after failing to secure housing from Florida State University, Nicole flew into a delusion that her overbearing mother would unalive her. Therefore, she beat her to it. She traveled for hours from Tallahassee to Carrollwood, where her mother and stepfather lived. She first unalived her stepfather and then spent 2 hours meticulously cleaning the crime scene, waiting for her mother to arrive. A neighbor claimed that she heard Miriam Diniz pull into the driveway as usual, followed by a blood-curdling scream, and then witnessed a shadowy figure disappearing from the home. Investigators have since concluded that the shadowy figure was Nicole. They arrested her immediately, and she claimed that she suffered a mental breakdown. She stated that her mother had made her feel terrible her entire life, and she was sure that not securing housing would add to the anguish. However, the prosecution claimed that she'd unalived her stepfather and cleaned the crime scene meticulously, proving premeditation. In an 18-minute phone call with her brother from prison, Nicole seemed giddy and believed that she'd be released soon. She even told her brother that he would become the favorite now. The jury believed she was competent to stand trial and found her guilty of all counts, sentencing her to a life behind bars. Taylor Schabusiness. Tara Pakanich was shocked when she discovered the severed head of her 24-year-old son, Shad Thirion, lying in a bucket in the basement of her home. In February 2022, Shad was picked up from his mother's home by his girlfriend, Taylor Schabusiness. The two had been in a volatile relationship, which Tara disapproved of. They'd often get together with other friends and use illegal substances. During this particular weekend, Taylor picked up Shad from his home, while Tara and her boyfriend planned a weekend getaway. Sometime in the night, Shad and Taylor returned to the residence after using substances at another friend's residence. Together, they made love throughout the night, and at some point, Taylor claimed that Shad insisted she strangle him. Her defense team argued that Taylor acted on Shad's instructions, but because of the influence of substances, things got too far. The prosecution, however, claimed that she continued to use the metal chain that was used to strangle Shad for up to 5 minutes, even after he'd begun coughing blood. The prosecutor also claimed that Taylor continued to make love to Shad's deceased body into the morning, after which she beheaded him. She also removed the organs and placed them in plastic bags, the tote, cardboard boxes, and the bucket. Taylor initially planned on pleading not guilty by reason of insanity and put on a show in court. She tackled her defense attorney and, over the course of her trial, changed legal counsel several times. A judge eventually sentenced her to life imprisonment, and she's currently serving out her term at the Taycheedah Correctional Institution. Brittany Norwood. In 2011, Brittany Norwood unalived her co-worker, Jana Murray. The case received widespread media attention because of the crime scene, a Lululemon store. Apparently, Jana had checked Brittany's bag at clockout and found that she'd stolen a pair of pants. She then called the manager, who said she'd deal with it in the morning. Brittany went home, while Jana stayed behind to count inventory and close up. Sometime later, Brittany came back claiming she'd forgotten her wallet, but actually came with the intention to unalive Jana. The next morning, she staged the store to appear as if 2 men had broken in, robbed the store, and unalived Jana while tying up Brittany. While she was initially treated as another victim, investigators eventually found holes in Brittany's story, especially when they saw that her minor wounds were nothing compared to what Jana had sustained. They also found that she'd moved her car from the store location. When questioned, Brittany claimed that the robbers had ordered her to do so. Ultimately, a judge saw through her act as well and sentenced her to life in prison. Sheila Eddy. Skylar Neese did everything with her 2 best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Schoaf. The trio had met at University High School in West Virginia and had reportedly been inseparable since the day they'd become friends. They did everything together, even sneaking out to use substances and drink alcohol. This didn't impact Skylar's academics in any way, and she continued to be an honor roll student on her way to going to law school soon enough. But then, in 2012, on a random night, Sheila and Rachel decided to unalive her. Skylar was seen on CCTV sneaking out of her room to meet up with the girls. They went together to a spot where the 2 girls tackled Skylar to the ground and unalived her. It wasn't until 6 months later, and after an extensive search, that Rachel finally caved. She claimed that she had been remorseful since the moment they'd unalived Skylar. Apparently, Sheila and Rachel were in a relationship, and they were afraid that Skylar would tell their conservative parents. This was the only way out, according to them. While Rachel showed remorse for her actions, Sheila did not. A judge considered their age, all 16, including the victim, during sentencing, and allowed life in prison with the possibility of parole. Sheila's not due for parole until 2028. Brooklyn Cruz. Brooklyn Cruz became the center of a heartbreaking case from Fargo, North Dakota in 2017. She lived in the same building as 22-year-old Savannah LaFontaine Greywind, who was late in her pregnancy. One August afternoon, Savannah went upstairs to Brooke's apartment after being asked to try on a dress and didn't come back. The community launched a huge search. Days later, officers found a newborn in Brooke's home. Testing confirmed the child was Savannah's. Brooke gave different accounts at first, then admitted her role in court, telling the judge she was responsible and expressing remorse. In early 2018, she received a life sentence with no chance of parole. Courtroom video shows her speaking softly to the judge and listening as the sentence was read, while family members described their loss and hopes for the baby's future. The child was placed with relatives and is being raised within the family.